Okay, so the last one that's come in is you've obviously travelled quite a lot during your studies and as a registrar. What they were asking is there any noticeable difference in terms of bullying and the sorts of stresses you've described between different countries and different cultures? Is it the same in the UK as the US, as Canada?
So again, it's a really interesting question. So there's geographical variation even within the UK. Some regions are better than others. Some regions you find that there's more bullying. Some regions you find there's more harassment. We know from studies that these behaviours are global. So it's why Australia have their Operate With Respect campaign. It's why the US have released huge amounts of work around gender equity and all kinds of stuff. Canada are doing the same stuff around burnout and bullying and behaviour. The nuances can be slightly different because of societal norms and societal pressures. And because of population norms. So for example, in some countries, gender is a bigger deal. In other countries, it's more about race. In other countries, it's about religion. In other countries, it's about your sex or your gender or whatever that might be. So for example, I recently discovered in the States, you get 6 weeks maternity leave, and it's not maternity leave, it's sick leave. Because you are literally healing from the illness that is childbirth. Right? And so suddenly I'm there going, well, in the UK, we've got all these problems with people being held back from their mat leave and less than full time. In America are like, what the fuck is that? Like, you have a choice. You either have a kid or you don't. You either work full time or you don't. But actually the problems, the culture of healthcare, especially the hierarchy and the bullying, the data is actually pretty much the same across the board and around the world, because actually healthcare is this weird little international bubble of nostalgia that's actually very similar, because they all came from very similar roots, right? So you've got to remember that the American healthcare system basically still came from the British healthcare system. Like if you go to Harvard and Yale, they are copies of Oxford and Cambridge, because that was the people who went there to set those organizations up. Now, for example, in America, of course, there's a huge thing around insurance and earning and that sort of thing. So of course that has an impact, but actually in terms of the behaviors that are reported, no, people still talk about orthopods saying this and pediatricians saying that. And, you know, if you go to Australia, again, you get more talk about this issue or that issue. Interestingly, for example, if you talk to Australians and Canadians, they'll talk a lot about native peoples. Something we don't really have in the UK, right? But they will talk out there about the bullying towards the native peoples and the fact that a lot of the land they're on kind of isn't theirs. But actually, again, it still comes down to power and undermining all that sort of stuff. So one of the reasons I think that Hammer It Out and similar things that we've started, have taken off is actually because it is international. And people from all over the world go, yeah, that sounds a lot like what I'm going through. I met someone recently from South Africa who was like, you talk and it's like you've been to where I work. And I'm like, really? Because you have very niche problems in South Africa. And she's like, yeah, you can change some of the nomenclature, some of the language, but actually overall, globally, it sounds like where I work. So actually, it's a global problem, and it's, I think, why it's become such a big conversation.